We could see the drain now as we drew nearer. Up until now, I hadn't really noticed the little bungalow which stood just nearby. It was a drab, weather-beaten looking building, its whitewashed exterior having long gone, only to reveal great gashes of cement and lichen. It had once, a pale blue painted balcony spanning the front of it, and the wood looking rotten in places. It could have been such a cosy little snug, set back up a drive and overlooking the sea, and set against the unbroken blue of the sky. However, I was in no mood to romanticise. My disenchantment and frustration with the island was beginning to come to the surface, I think. I could see on the balcony there sat an elderly Greek lady, dressed all in black and barefooted. She had a small dog with her, who was sitting next to her, some sort of terrier it looked like. As we approached the drain, I could tell she was watching Lucy and I closely. I knelt down and peered under the concrete and iron-barred roof of the drain, and there was our kitten, tucked up into a tight ball and laying on his side, quite motionless. It melted my heart. I managed to dislodge a little gravel as I knelt further in, and the noise of this stirred him from his slumbers. He opened his eyes a fraction, partly through being rudely awakened, but mostly through the inability to open them any wider because of the sticky goo that encrusted the eyelids. He crawled out from under the drain and seemed very happy to see us, though, as he rubbed against my ankles and making little chirruping sounds. Strangely, this action sent a little frisson of optimism through me as I thought to myself, how could anyone not want to give this little fellow a home? I was almost hopeful. Lucy had already started emptying a food pouch into a clean bowl, and she put it down in front of him. He just fell on the food, and he ate ravenously. Whilst he ate, I was able to study him minutely. He had an endearing little ginger blob between his shoulder. His tail was completely ginger, and I thought perhaps his paws might have a sprinkling of colour too, but that could just have been grime. His tiny little ears, which flicked backwards and forwards while he ate, were ginger. This constant movement was perhaps him being very wary of possible threats while he ate. Living the way he did, in potential danger, perhaps that had taught him to be constantly on his guard. He soon finished his bowl and started nosing around Lucy's haversack. He seemed to realise where his meals were coming from, and Lucy looked at me. "Can I give him another one, Mum?" I nodded, not taking my eyes off him. I have always loved watching cats eat. The absolute and total concentration they devote to the job in hand always gave me sheer pleasure to see cats enjoying their food. He was even purring, and quite loudly too. Lucy chuckled and told me it was his outboard motor. She bent down and gave him his second helpings and refilled his water bowl as well. This time he was slower and more measured with his feeding, and I think that his eyes were probably bigger than his tummy. He did have a pot-bellied little tummy, despite also being thin all over, if that makes sense. Oh, the poor wee mite. In between taking a few mouthfuls now, he would stop and look up at Lucy and I every so often, as if to say thank you. Or perhaps not being able to believe his luck that he was being loved and looked after and fed such tasty food. Any food at all, in fact. Eventually his bowl was once again empty. He gave the customary languorous stretch and then settled down at our feet to start his washing regime. And now this is another little task I adore watching cats do. It is so peaceful. I had spent the majority of the night so far watching Misty go through the identical ritual, and our kitten mirrored her technique, as did my precious boys Louis, Simon and Mimi, nearly 2,000 miles away in Glasgow. It is the same all over the world for all cats. The energy they devote to the serious business of feline toilette never changes as they try to keep themselves scrupulously clean. Something made me look up. I could sense that we were being watched, and I was right. I realised that it was the elderly lady that I'd spied earlier. She had obviously been taking quite an interest in our ministrations from her vantage point on her rickety old balcony. I had a sudden brainwave. I lifted the kitten up as he had by now finished washing himself and was being tempted to play with a stick that Lucy had found. He didn't mind being picked up at all and seemed to be treating it all as one great adventure. Cradling him close to my chest, and with Lucy looking on after me in wide-eyed puzzlement, I made my way up the garden path of the tumble-down bungalow. As I walked towards the old lady, I smiled to show that I meant no harm. She made no attempt to stand up and greet me, but instead continued to stare at me, watching as I approached her, boldly, and not even stopping to consider whether she would be able to understand English. I asked her if she could give the kitten a home. She just shook her head and waved her arms about. Whether that was just to get rid of me, to warn me off, I just didn't know, as she did not say a word, just gesticulated wildly. Her expression had a finality about it, tight-lipped and not interested. She was making it perfectly clear that she didn't want to have our kitten, and I was certain of that. So I turned around and made my way back down the garden path and back to Lucy. "Mum, what were you thinking of? She could have been mad or something. She looked really angry." Lucy scolded me once I'd got back to the drain. I told her I had to try something, didn't I? But I knew she understood my motives. It was just a sheer audacity that had shocked her, I suppose, as normally I wouldn't have been that bold at home. And so we were back to square one again, if we'd ever left it, that is. Throughout all this, I was still holding the kitten close to me. He had made no attempt to jump out of my arms, not even a wriggle, while this crazy cat lady was going round door to door trying to get rid of him. I couldn't bear to part with him. I was enjoying the soft, snuggled little body that was so trustingly allowing me to hold him. Lucy tickled him under his chin, and he began to purr rapturously. I could feel his whole body vibrate with sheer delight at being made such a fuss of, and it was clear that he adored both of us. "Can I go and have a swim before we go back, please, Mum?" Lucy asked me. I said of course she could. She ran off down the sand to the sea, her lovely long hair flailing out behind her. She looked just like a little girl again. My little girl at 4 years old, happy and free and blissfully unaware, well, as we all are at that tender age, of future, of heartbreaks and the tragedies it was going to reveal for both of us. Reveal for all of us at some point. But, oh, to be a little girl again, to have no worries, to take life minute by minute, too young to have regrets, the days filled with wonderment and the future always exciting, life unfurling deliciously slowly. And still I held the kitten, holding him so close, like he was a little baby human, my child.